Hello, and welcome to this gentle journey through the ancient stories written in the stars. Tonight, we'll be traveling through the myths and legends that transform those stars into heroes and monsters, gods and mortals, all frozen in their eternal dance across the heavens. So let yourself sink deeper into comfort now. Feel the weight of the day dissolving as we prepare to lift our gaze to the stars. Your only task is to listen, to breathe, and to let these ancient stories carry you toward the peaceful shores of sleep. The stars are waiting, patient as they've always been, ready to share their secrets with those who take the time to listen. Let us begin our journey in the northern sky, where 5 bright stars form a distinctive W or M shape, depending on the season and your perspective. This is Cassiopeia, the vain queen whose pride set in motion one of the great tragedies of the ancient world. She sits upon her throne for all eternity, sometimes right side up in regal splendor, sometimes upside down in divine punishment, forever circling the North Star. Cassiopeia was the queen of Ethiopia, wife to King Cepheus, and mother to the beautiful Andromeda. She possessed a beauty that was renowned throughout the ancient world, but beauty alone doesn't earn one a place among the stars. It was her fatal flaw, her hubris, that wrote her name across the heavens. For Cassiopeia made a boast that would echo through eternity and bring catastrophe upon her entire kingdom. One day, perhaps while admiring her reflection in a polished bronze mirror, or while accepting the compliments of her courtiers, Cassiopeia declared that she and her daughter Andromeda were more beautiful than the Nereids, the 50 sea nymphs who attended Poseidon's court beneath the waves. These daughters of the sea were renowned for their beauty, and they danced through the Mediterranean waters, bringing aid to sailors and fishermen. To claim superiority over them was not merely vain, it was sacrilege. Word travels fast between the mortal and divine worlds, carried on ocean breezes and whispered by the waves themselves. When the Nereids heard of Cassiopeia's boast, they were outraged. They swam swiftly to Poseidon's underwater palace, where the Earthshaker sat upon his coral throne, coastal kingdom of Ethiopia. The waters rose higher and higher, swallowing fields and villages, forcing the people to retreat to the highlands. But the flood was only the beginning of divine retribution. From the depths of the ocean, Poseidon summoned Cetus, a sea monster so vast and terrible that its very approach caused the waters to boil and churn. This creature would ravage the coastline, devouring ships, fishermen, and anyone who dared approach the shore, until the kingdom made amends for their queen's pride. Near his queen in the night sky, you can find Cepheus, forming a shape like a house or a throne of his own. But while Cassiopeia sits in defiant pride, Cepheus appears forever troubled, a king caught between impossible choices. His stars are dimmer than his wife's, perhaps reflecting the burden of leadership when the gods themselves demand satisfaction. King Cepheus loved his wife despite her vanity, and he adored his daughter Andromeda with all the fierce protectiveness of a father. When the floods came and Cetus began its reign of terror along the coast, he consulted every wise man, every priest, every oracle in his kingdom. Ships could no longer leave the harbor. Trade had ceased, and his people cried out for relief from the monster that had turned their sea, once the source of their prosperity, into a domain of death. Finally, Cepheus made the journey to the oracle of Zeus Ammon, traveling through the desert to seek divine guidance. The oracle's words were clear but cruel. The only way to appease Poseidon and save the kingdom was to sacrifice Andromeda, the innocent princess, to the sea monster. She must be chained to the rocks at the shore and left for Cetus to devour. Only royal blood could wash away the stain of royal pride. Can you imagine the weight of that decision? A father forced to choose between his daughter and his entire kingdom. Cepheus returned home with a heart as heavy as stone. He pleaded with the oracle for another way, offered his own life instead, promised temples and treasures to Poseidon. But the gods are not swayed by mortal bargaining when divine justice has been pronounced. Some say Cepheus was weak for agreeing to the sacrifice. Others say he was trapped by the responsibilities of kingship, forced to think of the many over the one, even when that one was his own beloved daughter. In the night sky, he remains forever, neither condemned nor celebrated, but eternally present as a reminder that even kings must sometimes bow to forces greater than themselves. Now we turn to Andromeda herself, the innocent victim of her mother's pride. Her constellation stretches across the autumn sky, a line of stars that ancient astronomers saw as a beautiful maiden with her arms outstretched, forever bound by invisible chains. She is positioned near her parents, but separated from them, just as she was separated on that terrible day when she was led to the rocky shore. Andromeda had committed no crime except to be born beautiful and to be the daughter of a boastful mother. She was young, perhaps no more than 16 or 17, with her whole life stretching before her like an unwritten scroll. She had suitors from many kingdoms, princes and heroes who sought her hand, but fate had other plans for her. When her father returned from the oracle, with tears streaming down his face, Andromeda knew her destiny before he spoke the words. She had the courage of truly noble spirits, and though she wept for the life she would never live, she did not rage against her parents or the gods. Instead, she dressed in her finest robes, as if preparing for her wedding rather than her death, and walked with dignity to the appointed place. The rocks where she was chained jutted out into the sea, washed by waves that seemed to reach for her with foaming fingers. Bronze chains bound her wrists and ankles, chains forged specifically for this terrible purpose. Her parents, the court, and crowds of mourning citizens watched from the cliffs above as she was left alone to await the monster. As the hours passed, Andromeda's fear gave way to a strange calm. She watched the sun traverse the sky, felt the salt spray on her face, and listened to the crying of seabirds. Some say she sang, her voice carrying across the waters, a lament for the life she would never know. Others say she stood in silent dignity, every inch the princess even in her chains. The sea began to churn as evening approached. In the distance, a disturbance in the water grew larger and larger, moving toward the shore with terrible purpose. This was Cetus, the monster sent by Poseidon, and its constellation can still be seen in the winter sky. A vast, sprawling shape that speaks of primordial terror from the deep. Cetus was no ordinary creature. Born in the darkest trenches of the ocean, where pressure would crush any normal being, and no sunlight had ever penetrated, it was a thing of nightmares, made flesh. Ancient descriptions speak of a body like a whale, but far larger, with scales that gleamed like black metal, eyes that burned with cold fire, and a mouth filled with rows upon rows of teeth, each as long as a warrior's sword. The monster had ravaged Ethiopia's coast for weeks, growing bolder with each passing day. Entire fishing fleets had vanished into its maw, and those who escaped told tales of tentacles that could crush ships like eggs, and a roar that made the very cliffs tremble. Now it sensed the royal offering, waiting on the rocks, and it approached with the slow confidence of a predator that has never known defeat. As Cetus drew nearer, the water around it began to boil and steam. The creature was so vast that it displaced enormous amounts of water with each movement, creating waves that crashed higher and higher against Andromeda's rock. She could see it now, this thing that would be her death, and even her royal courage wavered. The crowd on the cliffs above screamed and wailed, but their cries were drowned out by the monster's approach. But fate had not abandoned Andromeda entirely. High above, a figure appeared against the darkening sky. A young man, flying through the air on winged sandals. This was Perseus, one of the greatest heroes of Greek mythology, whose constellation shows him forever holding his sword and the severed head of Medusa. Perseus was returning from his quest to slay the Gorgon Medusa, a task that had been set for him by King Polydectes, who desired Perseus's mother and wanted the young hero out of the way. But Perseus had succeeded where all others had failed. Using gifts from the gods, a polished shield from Athena, winged sandals from Hermes, and a cap of invisibility from Hades, he had crept up on the sleeping Gorgon and severed her head with a single stroke of his adamantine sword. Now, flying home with Medusa's head safely contained in a magical pouch, Perseus saw the strange scene below. A beautiful maiden chained to rocks, a crowd wailing on the cliffs, and a monstrous shape approaching through the waves. Without hesitation, the hero dove toward the shore, his heroic nature compelling him to act. He alighted on the rock beside Andromeda, just as Cetus reared up from the waves, water cascading from its massive form. The princess looked at him with wonder. This young man, who had appeared from nowhere, gleaming with divine gifts and radiating confidence. Perseus asked quickly for her story, and upon hearing of her unjust fate, his jaw set with determination. This would not happen, not while he had breath in his body and strength in his arm. The battle between Perseus and Cetus was a clash between human courage and primordial fury. The monster lunged with jaws wide enough to swallow a house, but Perseus danced away on his winged sandals, striking with his sword, wherever he could find purchase on the creature's armored hide. Cetus's tentacles whipped through the air, any one of them capable of dashing Perseus against the rocks. But the hero's divine gifts gave him the edge he needed. Finally, remembering the weapon he carried, Perseus pulled Medusa's head from its pouch and held it high. Even in death, the Gorgon's power remained. Cetus looked directly at those terrible snake-wreathed features and instantly began to transform, starting from its eyes and spreading outward. The monster turned to stone, becoming a massive reef that sailors would navigate around for generations to come. As Perseus fought, another figure circled in the sky above, a magnificent winged horse whose constellation prances across the autumn heavens. This was Pegasus, born from the blood of Medusa when Perseus had severed her head, a creature of pure beauty arising from ultimate horror. Pegasus was unlike any horse that had ever lived. His coat was white as fresh snow on Mount Olympus, his wings spread wider than the largest eagle's, and his eyes held an intelligence that spoke of his divine origin. When he flew, his hoofbeats echoed like thunder across the sky, and his mane streamed behind him like clouds. The winged horse had bonded with Perseus, recognizing perhaps a kindred spirit, both born from acts of violence, yet dedicated to higher purposes. During the battle with Cetus, Pegasus dove and wheeled, distracting the monster and giving Perseus crucial moments to strike. Some versions of the myth say that Perseus actually rode Pegasus during the battle, the first mortal to ever mount the divine steed. After Cetus was defeated and Andromeda freed from her chains, Perseus introduced her to Pegasus. The horse, normally wild and untamable, lowered his head gently for the princess to stroke, recognizing her noble spirit. Together, the three of them flew to the palace, where Perseus asked King Cepheus for Andromeda's hand in marriage, a request gladly granted by the relieved father. Pegasus would go on to have many adventures, eventually carrying the hero Bellerophon in his battle against the Chimera. But he never forgot Perseus and Andromeda. And when Zeus finally placed him among the stars, he was positioned near them, forever part of their story. Today, when you see the great square of Pegasus in the night sky, you're seeing the body of that magnificent steed, while his neck and head stretch toward the constellation of Andromeda, as if still watching over the princess he helped save. Now we turn our gaze to the zodiac, that great wheel of constellations through which the sun, moon, and planets travel in their endless dance across the sky. We begin with Aries, the ram, whose stars may appear modest compared to some constellations, but whose story speaks of divine rescue and the power of sacrifice. Long ago, in the kingdom of Boeotia, there lived a king named Athamas who had 2 children, Phrixus and Hele, by his first wife, Nephele, a cloud nymph. But Athamas took a second wife, Ino, who despised her stepchildren and plotted their destruction. Through deceit and manipulation, she convinced the kingdom that the only way to end a terrible drought was to sacrifice the young prince Phrixus to the gods. As the boy was led to the altar, his mother Nephele, though she had returned to the clouds, had not forgotten her children. She prayed to Zeus, reminding him of the injustice about to occur. The king of the gods sent a miraculous ram with fleece made of pure gold, a creature so magnificent that its wool shone like the sun itself. This divine ram could not only speak, but could fly through the air as easily as walking upon the earth. The golden ram arrived at the moment the knife was raised above Phrixus. "Climb upon my back," it said, in a voice like rumbling thunder. "You and your sister both." The children scrambled onto the ram's broad back, clutching the golden fleece as the magical creature rose into the air. Below them, the crowd gasped in awe and terror as their sacrificial victim was carried away by divine intervention. The ram flew eastward, carrying the children toward Colchis, a land at the far edge of the Black Sea where they would be safe. But as they soared over the narrow strait between Europe and Asia, young Helle lost her grip on the golden fleece. Despite her brother's desperate attempt to catch her, she tumbled through the air and fell into the waters below. Ever since, that strait has been called the Hellespont, the Sea of Helle, in memory of the lost princess. Phrixus arrived safely in Colchis, where King Aeetes welcomed him and eventually gave him his daughter in marriage. In gratitude for his rescue, Phrixus sacrificed the golden ram to Zeus. But first, he removed its miraculous fleece and gave it to King Aeetes. This fleece would be hung in a grove sacred to Ares and guarded by a dragon that never slept, becoming the very same golden fleece that Jason and the Argonauts would one day quest to retrieve. Zeus placed the ram among the stars as Ares, honoring the creature that had served as divine rescue. Though not the brightest constellation, Ares holds a special place as the first sign of the zodiac, marking the beginning of spring when the sun crosses the celestial equator. Just as the ram brought new life to Phrixus, so Ares brings new life to the world each year, a reminder that divine intervention can come in our darkest hours. Following Ares along the zodiac, we find Taurus, the bull, one of the most ancient and recognizable constellations. Its brightest star, Aldebaran, glows like a baleful red eye, while the Pleiades, those 7 sisters, ride upon the bull's shoulder. But this is no ordinary bull, for these stars tell the story of Zeus's passion and the founding of a great civilization. Europa was a princess of Phoenicia, daughter of King Agenor, and she possessed beauty that caught the eye of Zeus himself. The king of the gods watched her from Mount Olympus as she played with her handmaidens on the shores of the Mediterranean, gathering flowers and laughing in the spring sunshine. Zeus knew that if he appeared in his divine form, the girl would be terrified, and his wife Hera would certainly notice his descent from Olympus. So Zeus transformed himself into the most beautiful bull anyone had ever seen. His hide was pure white, like fresh snow. His horns seemed crafted from polished pearl, and his eyes were gentle and intelligent. Most remarkably, when he breathed, His breath smelled of spring flowers and honey. This magnificent creature appeared among the royal herds grazing near the shore, moving with such grace that he seemed to float rather than walk. Europa and her companions were enchanted by the beautiful bull. Unlike other bulls, he was gentle and playful, lowering his head for them to weave flowers around his horns. He lay down in the meadow grass, inviting them to pet his silky flanks. Europa, emboldened by the creature's docility, eventually climbed upon his back, laughing as her friends adorned both her and the bull with garlands of flowers. The moment Europa was securely seated, the bull rose smoothly to his feet and began to walk, slowly at first, toward the water. Europa laughed, thinking it was a game, but her laughter turned to alarm as the bull entered the waves and began to swim. Her cries to her companions grew faint as the bull swam faster and faster, his powerful body cutting through the Mediterranean waves like a ship. Yet strangely, Europa found she was not wet, and the bull's back remained steady and warm beneath her. Zeus, in his bull form, carried Europa all the way to Crete, where he finally revealed his true identity. There, on that island, Europa became the mother of 3 sons, including Minos, who would become the legendary king of Crete. The Minoan civilization that arose would dominate the Mediterranean for centuries, its people remembering their divine origin through the symbol of the bull, which appeared in their art, their architecture, and their religious ceremonies. But Taurus holds more than just Europa's bull. Within its borders shine the Pleiades, the 7 sisters who fled from the persistent hunter Orion. These daughters of Atlas and Pleione dance forever, just out of Orion's reach. Their light blue beauty visible to sharp eyes as a tiny dipper-shaped cluster. And nearby glow the Hyades, another group of sisters who wept so profusely for their brother Hyas, killed while hunting, that Zeus transformed them into stars, where their tears became the spring rains that help the flowers grow. As spring gives way to early summer, the twin stars of Gemini rise in the east, Castor and Pollux, 2 brothers whose love for each other was so strong that not even death could separate them. Their story speaks to the bonds between siblings and the sacrifices we make for those we love. Castor and Pollux were twins, but they had different fathers, a common occurrence in Greek mythology. Their mother was Leda, queen of Sparta, who on the same night lay with both her mortal husband Tyndareus and with Zeus, who had taken the form of a swan. From this union came 2 eggs, and from the eggs hatched 4 children. Castor and Clytemnestra from the mortal father, and Pollux and Helen from Zeus. Despite their different parentage, Castor and Pollux were inseparable from birth. They shared everything, learned the same skills, went on the same adventures. Castor became renowned as a horseman and warrior, while Pollux excelled at boxing. But each brother cheered the other's victories as if they were his own. They sailed with Jason on the Argo, helped hunt the Caledonian boar, and rescued their sister Helen when Theseus abducted her. The twins even fell in love with two sisters, Phoebe and Hilera, who were already betrothed to another pair of twins, Idas and Lynceus. This led to a confrontation that would test the bonds of brotherhood. In the battle that followed, Castor, being mortal, was struck down by Idas's spear. As he lay dying in his brother's arms, Pollux's grief was terrible to behold. The son of Zeus called upon his father, offering to give up his own immortality if it meant his brother could live. Zeus was moved by this display of brotherly love, but even the king of the gods could not simply restore a mortal life. Instead, he offered Pollux a choice. He could remain immortal and take his place on Olympus, or he could share his immortality with his brother, spending alternate days in the underworld and on Olympus. Without hesitation, Pollux chose to share his divine gift with Castor. But this arrangement meant the brothers were still separated half the time, and their grief during their partings moved even the gods. Finally, Zeus placed them both among the stars as the constellation Gemini, where they could be together forever. Sailors especially revered the twins, for they were said to appear as Saint Elmo's Swear on the masts of ships during storms, a sign that the vessel would survive the tempest. In the night sky, the stars Castor and Pollux shine with almost equal brightness, though careful observation reveals that Castor is actually a complex multiple star system, while Pollux glows with a golden hue. They stand together eternally, reminding us that love between siblings can overcome even the barrier between mortal and divine, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give is to share what we have with those we love. Between Gemini and Leo scuttles Cancer, the crab, its stars forming a faint, inverted Y in the summer sky. While it may be the faintest constellation in the zodiac, the story of the crab speaks to courage in the face of impossible odds, and how even the smallest creatures can earn immortality through bravery. The crab's story is intertwined with one of Heracles' greatest battles, his fight against the Lernaean Hydra, that monster with multiple heads that grew back double whenever one was cut off. As Heracles struggled with this seemingly impossible task in the swamps of Lerna, Hera watched from Olympus with growing frustration. She despised Heracles, this son of Zeus, born from mortal Alcmene, and had set these 12 labors upon him, hoping he would fail. Seeing that Heracles was actually gaining ground against the Hydra, helped by his nephew Iolaus, who cauterized the neck stumps to prevent regrowth, Hera decided to intervene. She sent a giant crab from the depths of the swamp, commanding it to distract the hero by attacking his feet while he battled the monster. Now this crab knew it stood no chance against the mighty Heracles, the hero who had strangled serpents in his crib, who would go on to hold up the sky itself, could crush a crab without even noticing. But the creature had been given a command by the Queen of the Gods herself, and it would not shirk its duty, no matter how hopeless the task seemed. The crab scuttled forward across the muddy ground of the swamp, between the thrashing coils of the Hydra and the swift-moving feet of the hero. With its claws, it grabbed onto Heracles' heel, pinching with all its might. The hero, focused on the deadly heads of the Hydra weaving above him, at first ignored the minor irritation. But the crab persisted, clamping down harder, determined to fulfill its divine mission. Finally, with an annoyed grunt, Heracles stamped his foot, crushing the crab instantly. It had survived perhaps 30 seconds in battle with Greece's greatest hero, but in those 30 seconds, it had shown courage that the gods could not ignore. Even Hera, though frustrated that her plan had failed, was impressed by the creature's bravery in the face of certain death. As a reward for its courage and loyalty, Hera placed the crab among the stars as the constellation Cancer. There it remains, not bright or glorious like some constellations, but eternal nonetheless. In the center of Cancer lies the beehive cluster, a swarm of stars visible as a misty patch to the naked eye, perhaps representing all the small, brave souls who face impossible odds with courage. As summer reaches its height, Leo the lion prowls across the meridian, one of the few constellations that actually resembles what it represents. The curved stars forming the lion's mane and head, known as the sickle, are unmistakable, while the bright star Regulus marks the lion's heart. This is no ordinary lion, but the Nemean lion, the first and perhaps most famous of Heracles' 12 labors. The Nemean lion was a monster born of divine parentage, some say offspring of the monsters Typhon and Echidna. Others claim it fell from the moon goddess Selene. What all agreed upon was that This was no natural creature. It terrorized the region around Nemea, dwelling in a cave with 2 entrances and emerging to devour livestock and travelers. Its golden hide was impervious to mortal weapons. Arrows bounced off harmlessly, swords bent or shattered against its skin, and spears could find no purchase. When Heracles arrived in Nemea for his first labor, the locals warned him about the lion's invulnerability. The hero, still learning the full extent of his divine strength, first tried conventional methods. He shot arrow after arrow at the beast, each one crafted by his own hands, but they shattered like twigs against the golden hide. His sword, a gift from Hermes, bent when he struck the lion's flank. Even his massive club, carved from a wild olive tree he had uprooted with his bare hands, only served to drive the lion back into its cave. Realizing that weapons were useless, Heracles formed a different plan. He blocked one entrance of the lion's cave with huge boulders, then entered through the other, trapping both himself and the beast inside. In the darkness of the cave, a terrible struggle ensued. The lion's claws, which could shred bronze armor like cloth, raked across Heracles' skin. Its teeth, which had crushed countless bones, sought his throat. But Heracles had inherited more than just strength from his divine father. He had the courage to grapple with monsters in the dark, to trust in his own power when all tools failed him. He caught the lion in his mighty arms, and despite its thrashing and roaring, he held on. His arms, which would one day hold up the sky itself, slowly tightened around the lion's throat. The beast's struggles grew weaker and weaker until finally the terror of Nemea lay still. When Heracles emerged from the cave carrying the dead lion across his shoulders, the people of Nemea could scarcely believe it. He tried to skin the beast, but even in death, its hide resisted all attempts until Athena whispered to him the secret. Only the lion's own claws could pierce its skin. Using this knowledge, Heracles crafted from the hide an invulnerable cloak that he would wear for the rest of his labors, the lion's head serving as a helmet. Zeus placed the lion among the stars as Leo, honoring both the creature's divine nature and his son's victory. There it shines, the brightest constellation of spring and summer, its heart star, Regulus, meaning little king. The lion that had been invulnerable in life became immortal in death, forever prowling the celestial sphere, reminding us that our greatest challenges often require us to abandon our tools and trust in our own inner strength. As summer fades to autumn, Virgo rises, the largest constellation of the zodiac and the only female figure among its 12 signs. Her stars trace the outline of a maiden holding a sheaf of wheat, with brilliant spica marking the grain that promises harvest and abundance. But who is this celestial maiden? The myths offer several identities, each one speaking to themes of justice, loss, and the relationship between gods and mortals. Some say Virgo is Demeter, the goddess of grain and harvest, forever searching the skies for her lost daughter Persephone. When Hades abducted Persephone to be his queen in the underworld, Demeter's grief was so profound that she abandoned her duties. Crops withered, fields lay barren, and humanity faced starvation. Only when Zeus intervened, decreeing that Persephone would spend part of each year above ground with her mother, did Demeter relent. Virgo, holding her wheat sheaf, represents the goddess's gift of agriculture to humanity, the knowledge that allows civilization to flourish. Others identify Virgo as Persephone herself, the maiden of spring, who must descend each year to the underworld. In this interpretation, her appearance in the night sky marks her time above ground, bringing life and growth, while her journey below the horizon represents her return to Hades' realm. The constellations' prominence during harvest time fits this cycle of death and rebirth that governs the agricultural year. But perhaps the most poignant identification is with Astrea, the star maiden and goddess of justice. During the Golden Age, when Cronus ruled and humanity lived in perfect harmony, the gods walked freely among mortals. Astrea, daughter of Zeus and Themis, lived on earth, teaching humans about justice and righteous living. She carried scales to weigh right and wrong, and her presence ensured that peace and fairness prevailed. As the ages declined from gold to silver to bronze, humanity grew more corrupt. Violence, greed, and dishonesty spread across the world. One by one, the gods abandoned Earth for Olympus, disgusted by mortal behavior. But Astrea lingered, hoping that humanity might redeem itself, continuing to plead for justice and mercy in a world that increasingly ignored such concepts. Finally, when the Iron Age brought war and betrayal to every corner of Earth, even patient Astrea could remain no longer. She was the last immortal to abandon humanity, spreading her wings and flying to the heavens with tears streaming down her face. Zeus placed her among the stars as Virgo, still holding her sheaf of grain as a reminder of the abundance that comes with just living. And near her, he placed her scales as the constellation Libra. Some say that Astrea will return when humanity learns again to live in harmony and justice. Until then, she watches from the heavens, the eternal Virgin, pure and incorruptible, waiting for the day when mortals prove worthy of walking again with gods. Every autumn, when Virgo rises, it's a reminder of what was lost and what might be regained if we could only remember how to weigh our actions with justice and treat each other with the fairness that Astrea taught. Unique among the zodiac constellations, Libra represents not a living being, but an object, the golden scales of justice. These are the same scales that Astrea carried during her time on Earth, now set among the stars as an eternal reminder of the balance that should govern all things. Some ancient astronomers saw these stars as the claws of Scorpius, but the interpretation as scales speaks more deeply to human needs and cosmic order. The scales appear in the sky at the autumn equinox, that moment of perfect balance when day and night are equal in length. This timing is no coincidence, for Libra represents the equilibrium that the universe constantly seeks between light and darkness, summer and winter, order and chaos, mercy and justice. The ancient Greeks understood that without balance, everything falls into disorder. In some tellings, these are the scales that Zeus uses to weigh the fates of mortals, particularly in times of war. During the Trojan War, Homer describes Zeus placing the fates of Greeks and Trojans in golden scales to determine which side would prevail on any given day. The heavier side would sink toward defeat, while the lighter would rise to victory. Even the king of gods did not arbitrarily decide outcomes, but allowed cosmic justice to determine fate. The Romans particularly revered Libra, associating it with the goddess Justitia, who, like Astrea, embodied divine justice. They depicted her blindfolded, holding scales in one hand and a sword in the other, showing that justice must be both impartial and enforced. Roman judges would time important trials to coincide with Libra's prominence in the sky, believing that the constellation's influence would guide them to fair verdicts. But the scales also remind us of the delicate balance within ourselves. Just as the constellation Libra lies between Virgo, the virgin of purity, and Scorpius, the scorpion of passion and death, we constantly balance between our higher and lower natures. The scales never rest in perfect equilibrium for long, just as our lives swing between extremes, always seeking that center point where we can rest in harmony. In Chinese astronomy, these same stars form the azure dragon's claws, grasping at the cosmic pearl of wisdom. In ancient Egypt, they were the scales that weighed hearts against the feather of Maat in the afterlife. Across cultures, these stars speak to humanity's universal understanding that justice, balance, and judgment are written into the very fabric of the cosmos, as essential to the universe as the forces that keep planets in their orbits and stars burning in the darkness. As autumn deepens, the constellation Scorpius crawls across the southern sky, its distinctive J-shaped pattern of stars unmistakably suggesting a scorpion with curved tail and deadly stinger. The red supergiant star Antares glows at its heart, its name meaning rival of Mars, for its reddish color that matches the war god's planet. This celestial scorpion bears witness to one of mythology's great rivalries and the consequences of unbridled pride. The scorpion story is inseparable from that of Orion, the mighty hunter whose constellation dominates winter skies. Orion was the son of Poseidon and inherited from his father the ability to walk on water as easily as on land. He grew to enormous size and strength, becoming the greatest hunter the world had ever known. No beast could escape his arrows. No monster could match his strength. He cleared whole islands of dangerous animals and served various kings as a hunter of legendary skill. But success bred arrogance in Orion's heart. One day, boasting to anyone who would listen, he declared that he would hunt and kill every animal on earth to prove his supremacy. The animals of the world trembled at this threat, and their fear reached the ears of Gaia, the Earth Mother herself. The primordial goddess was outraged. The creatures of Earth were her children, from the mightiest elephant to the smallest ant, and she would not allow some boastful demigod to slaughter them all for sport. Gaia's response was both simple and profound. She didn't send a dragon or a titan to battle Orion. Instead, she sent forth a scorpion, enhanced with divine power, but still fundamentally a small creature compared to the giant hunter. The scorpion emerged from a crack in the earth just as Orion was striding across a hillside, probably heading to hunt some great beast. The hunter laughed when he saw his tiny opponent, raising his foot to crush it like any common insect. But this was no ordinary scorpion. It darted forward with supernatural speed, dodging Orion's stamping feet and the swing of his massive club. In the struggle that followed, the scorpion struck true, driving its stinger into the hunter's heel, the only part of his body that touched the earth, and thus was vulnerable to Gaia's creature. The venom worked quickly, and the mighty Orion fell like a great tree, brought low by a creature he could have held in the palm of his hand. Both Orion and the scorpion were placed among the stars, but in Zeus's wisdom, they were set on opposite sides of the sky. When Scorpius rises in the east, Orion sets in the west. And when Orion dominates winter nights, Scorpius is hidden below the horizon. They chase each other eternally around the celestial sphere, but never meet, a reminder that pride can be our downfall, and that in nature's balance, even the mightiest can fall to the smallest. As winter approaches and Scorpius begins to set, Sagittarius the archer rises, his bow aimed at the scorpion's heart, as if to avenge Orion. But this is no ordinary archer. The constellation represents a centaur, that race of beings with the upper body of a man and the lower body of a horse. While most centaurs were wild and unruly, slaves to their animal passions, the centaur of Sagittarius represents Chiron, the wisest and noblest of his kind. Chiron was unique among centaurs, for his parentage set him apart from his rowdy brethren. He was the son of Cronus, who had taken the form of a horse to escape his wife Rhea's notice, and the Oceanid Philyra. This divine parentage granted Chiron immortality and a nature more balanced between the civilized and wild. While other centaurs reveled in wine and violence, Chiron devoted himself to learning and teaching. He established a school in a cave on Mount Pelion, where he taught the arts of healing, music, archery, prophecy, and wisdom. The greatest heroes of Greece came to learn from him. Achilles learned the arts of war and healing. Jason learned leadership and navigation. Asclepius learned medicine so well he could raise the dead. And even Apollo, god of music and archery, was said to have refined his skills under Chiron's tutelage. But Chiron's greatest lesson came through his own suffering. During a visit from Heracles, an accident occurred that would have far-reaching consequences. Heracles was being entertained by the centaur Pholus when other centaurs, driven wild by the smell of wine, attacked. In the battle that followed, Heracles shot arrows tipped with the Hydra's poison to drive them off. One arrow passed through an attacker and struck Chiron in the knee. The wound was agonizing and incurable. The Hydra's poison could kill any mortal and caused excruciating pain even to immortals. Chiron, with all his medical knowledge, could not heal himself. He was doomed to eternal suffering. A cruel irony for one who had spent his life healing others. The wise centaur bore his pain with dignity, continuing to teach even as the poison burned through his veins. Eventually, Chiron found release through an act of compassion. Prometheus, the Titan who had stolen fire for humanity, was chained to a rock where an eagle daily devoured his regenerating liver. The only way to free Prometheus was for an immortal to voluntarily surrender their immortality and take his place in death. Chiron, seeking an end to his suffering while performing a final noble act, made this sacrifice. Zeus, moved by Chiron's nobility throughout his life and in his final act, placed him among the stars as Sagittarius. The constellation shows him with bow drawn, arrow aimed not in aggression, but in the defense of others, just as he had spent his life defending civilization and knowledge against chaos and ignorance. The arrow points toward the center of our galaxy, as if Chiron still seeks the deepest truths even from his celestial throne. In the depths of winter, when nights are longest and coldest, Capricornus rises, a strange hybrid creature with the front half of a goat and the tail of a fish. This peculiar form tells the story of panic and transformation, of how even the gods can know fear, and how quick thinking can save us in our darkest moments. The constellation represents Pan, the god of wild places, shepherds, and rustic music. With his goat legs, horns, and wild nature, Pan was already an unusual figure among the more refined Olympian gods. He preferred forests to palaces, the pipes to the lyre, and the company of nymphs and satyrs to the formal gatherings on Mount Olympus. His music could inspire wild dancing or peaceful sleep, and his sudden appearance could cause the unreasoning fear we still call panic. The story of his transformation begins with Typhon, the most terrible monster Greek mythology ever produced. Born from Gaia as her final weapon against the Olympians, Typhon was a creature of pure chaos and destruction. He had 100 dragon heads that breathed fire and spoke in the tongues of all animals. His body was so vast that his head brushed the stars, and his arms could span from east to west. When he attacked Olympus, even the gods fled in terror. Pan was by the river Nile when word came that Typhon was approaching, destroying everything in his path. The gods were fleeing, transforming themselves into animals to escape the monster's notice. Without hesitation, Pan dove into the river, intending to transform himself entirely into a fish to escape. But in his panic, a feeling he knew well, being its namesake, the transformation went awry. The part of his body underwater became a fish, complete with scales and a powerful tail, but his upper half remained that of a goat. At first, Pan was horrified by his half-complete transformation. But when he emerged from the river and looked back, he saw that Typhon had passed by without noticing him. The strange hybrid form had actually saved him, being so unusual that even the all-seeing monster had dismissed it as a trick of the eyes. Later, when Zeus finally defeated Typhon and the gods returned to their proper forms, they laughed at Pan's appearance, but also praised his quick thinking. Zeus was so amused by the form and impressed by Pan's resourcefulness that he placed the image among the stars as Capricornus. The constellation serves as a reminder that sometimes our mistakes and imperfect solutions can save us. That panic can lead to innovation, and that the strangest combinations can have their own power. In astrology, Capricornus is associated with ambition and climbing to great heights, like a goat, while maintaining emotional depths, like a fish. A duality born from that moment of divine panic by the Nile. As winter begins its slow retreat, Aquarius rises, pouring out celestial waters from his eternal urn. This constellation has been seen as a water-bearer by cultures around the world, from Babylon to Egypt to Greece, for its appearance coincides with the rainy season in the Mediterranean. But the Greek myth tells us this is no mere mortal carrying water. This is Ganymede, the most beautiful youth who ever lived, kidnapped by Zeus himself to serve as cupbearer to the gods. Ganymede was a prince of Troy, descended from the founder of that great city. Ancient poets struggled to find words adequate to describe his beauty. His skin was said to glow like polished marble in moonlight. His hair fell in perfect waves, like a calm sea at sunset, and his eyes held the clarity of a mountain springs. He spent his days on Mount Ida, tending his father's flocks, unaware that his beauty had caught the attention of the king of the gods. Zeus watched Ganymede from Olympus and became consumed with desire. The god who had pursued so many beauties, both mortal and divine, had never seen anyone like this Trojan prince. But Zeus knew that simply appearing to the boy would cause terror, and Hera's jealousy was already legendary. So the god formed a different plan. He transformed himself into a magnificent eagle, his sacred bird, with feathers that shone like bronze and eyes that held divine fire. One day, as Ganymede sat playing his lyre to his flocks, the great eagle swooped down from the clouds. The sheep scattered in fear, but Ganymede stood transfixed by the bird's beauty and power. In one smooth motion, the eagle's talons gently grasped the youth's shoulders, lifting him into the air. Higher and higher they soared, above the clouds, above where mortal lungs could draw breath, until they reached Olympus itself. There, Zeus revealed himself and made Ganymede an offer no mortal had received before: eternal youth and beauty, immortality, and the position of cupbearer to the gods. This was the highest honor possible for a mortal, to serve nectar and ambrosia at the divine feasts, to stand at Zeus's right hand, to be forever young and beautiful among the immortals. Some say Ganymede accepted willingly, dazzled by the glory of Olympus. Others say he wept for his mortal life and family left behind. Ganymede's father, King Tros, grieved terribly for his lost son until Zeus sent Hermes with gifts. A pair of divine horses that could run over water, and a golden vine crafted by Hephaestus. More importantly, Hermes assured Tros that his son was not dead, but honored above all mortals, serving the gods and granted eternal life. This somewhat consoled the father, and the divine horses became the foundation of Troy's legendary cavalry. In Olympus, Ganymede served faithfully, moving among the gods with his golden pitcher, ensuring their cups never emptied. Hera, predictably, despised him, as she did all of Zeus's loves, but even she could not deny the boy's grace and beauty. The other gods welcomed him, and he became particularly close to Apollo and Hermes, who appreciated his gentle nature and mortal perspective on divine matters. Zeus honored Ganymede further by placing him among the stars as Aquarius, forever pouring out the waters of life. The stream from his urn becomes the celestial river Eridanus, and nearby swim the fish of Pisces, who drink from his eternal flow. During the time of Aquarius, the rains come to earth, as if the divine cupbearer is sharing the nectar of the gods with the mortal world below. The zodiacal year concludes with Pisces, two fish swimming in opposite directions, yet bound together by a cord. This constellation, though faint to the eye, tells a tale of love, terror, and the lengths to which we go to maintain our connections, even in the face of transformation and flight. The fish represent Aphrodite and her son Eros, caught in a moment of panic that would bind them together for eternity. The story begins, like that of Capricornus, with the rampage of Typhon. When this ultimate monster attacked the gods, each deity fled in their own way. But Aphrodite faced a particular challenge, for she was not alone, but with her young son Eros by the banks of the Euphrates River. The goddess of love, more used to conquering hearts than fleeing monsters, heard the roar of Typhon approaching like 1,000 thunderstorms combined. Looking at young Eros, Aphrodite felt a fear she had never known. Not for herself, for gods can endure much, but for her child. Though Eros would grow to become the god who could make anyone fall in love with his arrows. At this time, he was still young and vulnerable. The ground shook with Typhon's approach, and the other gods were already transforming into animals to escape. But what form could protect both mother and child? In desperation, Aphrodite grabbed Eros and dove into the Euphrates. As they plunged into the cool waters, she called upon the river spirits and her own divine power to transform them both into fish. But even as their bodies changed, scales replacing skin, fins replacing limbs, Aphrodite's greatest fear was not Typhon, but losing her son in the murky waters of the river. In the confusion of transformation and flight, they might be separated forever. So as the transformation took hold, Aphrodite performed one more act of magic. She bound herself and Eros together with an unbreakable cord, ensuring that no current could separate them. No predator could take one without the other. In their fish forms, they swam deep into the river, the cord between them glowing with divine light. They hid among the reeds and river stones until Typhon had passed, their quicksilver forms invisible in the dappled water. When the danger had passed and the gods reclaimed their true forms, Aphrodite and Eros emerged from the river, transformed by more than just their temporary shapes. The experience of shared fear and the bond created in that moment of crisis had deepened their connection. The cord that had bound them as fish remained as an invisible tie of love and protection between mother and son. To commemorate this moment, when love proved stronger than fear, when the bond between parent and child overcame even primordial terror, Zeus placed the two fish among the stars. There they swim eternally, still connected by their glowing cord, moving in different directions as Eros grows into his own power, but never fully separating. The constellation. Pisces reminds us that love creates bonds that transcend form, that in our moments of greatest fear, we reach for those we cherish, and that sometimes being bound to another is not a limitation, but a salvation. Now we turn our gaze to winter's sky, where no constellation commands attention, quite like Orion the hunter. Even those who know little of the stars can spot his distinctive belt, 3 bright stars in a perfect line, with the brilliant stars, Betelgeuse and Rigel, marking his shoulder and foot. He stands eternally, ready for battle, club raised, shield before him, facing the charge of Taurus the bull. But this celestial giant bears the weight of a story that warns of the dangers of hubris and the price of boasting against the natural order. Orion was born to be extraordinary. His father was Poseidon, god of the sea, and his mother was Euryale, daughter of King Minos of Crete. From his divine father, he inherited not only great size and strength, but also the ability to walk upon the waves as easily as upon solid ground. He grew to such height that he could wade through the deepest oceans with his head above water, striding from island to island, like a man walking through a shallow stream. From his earliest days, Orion showed a natural gift for the hunt. No animal could escape him. No trail was too faint for him to follow. No prey too swift for him to overtake. He crafted his own weapons, including a massive bronze club that only he could lift. And his aim with a bow was so precise that people said he could shoot the eye from a gnat at 100 paces. As his fame grew, kings and nobles called upon him to rid their lands of dangerous beasts. On the island of Chios, King Oenopion hired Orion to clear the land of wild animals that were preventing cultivation. Orion accomplished this task with such efficiency that soon no creature larger than a rabbit remained on the island. But during his stay, he fell in love with the king's daughter, Merope. He sought her hand in marriage, but Oenopion kept delaying, setting new tasks, unwilling to let his daughter marry even so great a hero. Frustrated and drunk on wine one night, Orion forced his way into Merope's chambers. For this crime, Oenopion, with the help of Dionysus, put Orion into a deep sleep and then blinded him, casting him out on the beach. The mighty hunter, reduced to a blind beggar, stumbled along the shore until he heard the ringing of a cyclops' hammer. Following the sound, he reached the forge of Hephaestus, where he begged for help. Taking pity on him, Hephaestus lent Orion one of his assistants, Sedalion, who climbed upon the giant's shoulders to guide him. Following an oracle's advice, they traveled east to the edge of the world, where Helios, the sun god, rose each morning. When the first rays of dawn touched Orion's face, his sight was miraculously restored. He could see again, but the experience had not humbled him as perhaps the gods intended. Instead, Orion's success and restored sight only fed his arrogance. He traveled the world, hunting increasingly dangerous prey, clearing entire regions of animals. On Crete, he hunted with Artemis herself, the goddess of the hunt, and for a time they were companions. Some say she fell in love with him, the only man who could match her skill with a bow. But Apollo, her twin brother, grew jealous of their friendship and plotted to end it. It was then that Orion made his fatal boast. Standing on a mountaintop, perhaps showing off for Artemis, or simply drunk on his own success, he declared to the heavens, "I am Orion, the greatest hunter who has ever lived or ever will live. No creature on earth can escape me. I will hunt and kill every animal that walks, swims, or flies. The world will be empty of beasts, and all will know that I alone am master of nature." At Orion's heel follows his faithful companion, marked by Sirius, the brightest star in our entire night sky. This is Canis Major, the greater dog, though which dog from mythology he represents is a matter of some debate. Some say this is Laelaps, the magical hound that could catch anything it chased. Others claim it is Maera, the faithful dog of Icarius. But most agree that this celestial canine is Orion's own hunting dog, as faithful in the sky as he was on earth. Orion's dog was no ordinary hound. Born from a line of dogs bred by Artemis herself, he possessed supernatural speed, endurance, and tracking ability. His nose could follow a trail days old through running water, and his deep bay could freeze prey in terror. He stood as tall as a man's waist, with a coat that shone like burnished copper in sunlight, and eyes that held an almost human intelligence. The dog had been Orion's companion since he was a pup, growing alongside his master's reputation. When Orion strode through forests, his hound would range ahead, flushing game from cover. When the hunter waded through the seas, the dog would swim beside him, powerful strokes carrying him through the waves. In camp at night, he would lie at his master's feet, alert even in sleep to any danger that might approach. During the hunt, the dog and hunter worked as one being. A simple gesture from Orion would send the hound racing in pursuit, or call him back to heel. The dog learned to drive prey toward his master's arrows, to corner dangerous beasts until Orion could deliver the killing blow, to track wounded animals through the thickest cover. Together, they were unstoppable. When Orion cleared Chios of wild beasts, it was his dog who routed them from their hiding places. When he hunted with Artemis on Crete, even the goddess was impressed by the hound's skill. The dog could run from dawn to dusk without tiring, his musical baying echoing through valleys and over mountains. He feared nothing, charging bears and boars with equal courage. But the dog's greatest quality was his loyalty. When Orion was blinded and cast out, his hound found him on the beach, licking his master's face and guiding him until Sedalion arrived. During their journey to find Helios, the dog hunted for his master, bringing him food and protecting him from those who might prey upon a blind giant. When Orion's sight returned, the dog's joy was boundless. On that final day, when Orion made his boastful claim to kill every animal on earth, his dog stood beside him, tail wagging, ready as always to help his master achieve any goal. When Gaia sent the scorpion and the great hunter fell to its venom, stories say the dog howled with such grief that it reached the heavens. He refused to leave his master's body, standing guard against scavengers, until he too died of grief. Zeus, moved by such loyalty, placed the dog in the heavens near his master. There, Canis Major follows still, Sirius at his heart, burning brighter than any other star, as if the dog's devotion generates its own light. When Sirius rises before dawn in late summer, the hot dog days begin. Perhaps the faithful hound, still warming himself by an eternal celestial fire, waiting for his master to rise and resume the hunt. Not far from Canis Major, marked primarily by the bright star Procyon, meaning before the dog, as it rises shortly before Sirius, we find Canis Minor, the lesser dog. This smaller constellation represents Orion's other hunting companion. For what great hunter would venture forth with only one hound? This second dog was different from the first, smaller and swifter, bred for speed rather than power. Where the greater dog was like a battering ram, breaking through brush and overwhelming prey with strength, the lesser dog was like an arrow, able to pursue the fastest game through the densest forest without slowing. His coat was white as fresh snow, making him easy to spot at distance, and his bark was higher, more piercing than his companion's deep bay. The two dogs complemented each other perfectly in the hunt. The lesser dog would often work the high ground, while the greater dog took the valleys. Together, they could surround prey, cutting off escape routes with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. The smaller dog excelled at hunting birds, able to leap incredible heights to snatch fowl from the air, while also being nimble enough to pursue rabbits through their warren. In personality, too, they differed. Where the greater dog was serious and focused, the lesser dog retained a playful spirit. He would chase butterflies when not hunting, play in streams, and perform acrobatic leaps for the pure joy of movement. Yet when Orion gave the signal to hunt, he became all business, his playfulness transforming into deadly efficiency. The lesser dog had one unique ability that made him invaluable. He could hunt by sight as well as scent. His keen eyes could spot movement at vast distances, often alerting Orion to prey before even the greater dog had caught the scent. This combination of speed, agility, and sharp vision made him perfect for hunting the swiftest game. When placed in the heavens, Canis Minor received a position of honor, rising before his larger companion as if scouting the path ahead, just as he did in life. Though his constellation is small, just two main stars, Procyon shines as the 8th brightest star in our sky, ensuring that Orion's lesser dog is anything but forgotten. Directly beneath Orion's feet, as if frozen in the act of being pursued, crouches Lepus, the hare. This modest constellation tells a story within a story, for this is no ordinary rabbit, but a creature placed in the heavens to represent all prey, forever fleeing from the mighty hunter, yet never quite caught. The hare in question was the swiftest of its kind, living in the meadows near where Orion often hunted. Its fur changed color with the seasons, brown in summer, white in winter, and it possessed an almost supernatural ability to evade capture. Orion first encountered it during one of his grand hunts, when his dogs flushed it from cover. What should have been a simple chase became an obsession. The hare would bound ahead, seeming almost to fly over the ground, its powerful hind legs propelling it in unpredictable zigzags. When the dogs drew close, it would double back on its trail, leap sideways, or dive into thick cover where larger animals couldn't follow. Time and again, Orion thought he had it cornered, only for the creature to escape through some clever ruse. The hunter's respect for the hare grew with each failed capture. Here was an animal that survived not through strength or ferocity, but through wit, speed, and an indomitable will to live. The hare seemed to understand Orion's tactics, learning from each chase, never falling for the same trap twice. It became a game between them, hunter and hunted, each testing the other's limits. Seasons passed, and still the hare evaded capture. Orion would glimpse it sometimes, when not actively hunting, sitting in a meadow grooming its fur, or feeding on clover. The hare would look directly at him, as if acknowledging their strange relationship, before bounding away. The hunter found himself deliberately avoiding that meadow when hunting other game, preserving this one challenge for special occasions. When Orion made his fatal boast about killing every animal on Earth, some say the hare was listening from a nearby thicket. It understood that if this threat were carried out, it too would eventually fall. Perhaps it was the hare who carried word of Orion's hubris to other creatures, setting in motion the events that would lead to the hunter's downfall. After Orion's death and transformation into a constellation, the gods placed the hare beneath his feet in the sky. But observe carefully. The hare is not caught. It crouches, ready to spring away at any moment, forever just out of reach. This placement serves as an eternal reminder that no hunter, no matter how skilled, can truly conquer all of nature. Some creatures will always remain free, and in their freedom lies the balance that keeps the world whole. On clear winter nights, you can see this eternal chase frozen in the stars. Orion with his club raised, his dogs at his heels, and beneath them all, the humble hair that represents every creature's right to life and freedom. The chase continues forever, but it will never end. For in the heavens, as on earth, the hunt must have limits, and some things must remain forever wild and free. Flowing from near Orion's feet and winding far to the southern horizon runs Eridanus, the celestial river. This long, meandering constellation represents one of the great rivers of mythology, though which river exactly has been debated since ancient times. To the Greeks, it was the river into which Phaethon fell after his disastrous attempt to drive the chariot of the sun. But its placement near Orion tells another tale as well, of how even the mightiest hunter must respect the boundaries set by nature. In life, Orion often hunted along river banks, for that is where game came to drink. He would wade through the shallows, using his divine heritage to walk upon the water when it grew too deep. Rivers were highways for him, paths that led to new hunting grounds and adventures. But rivers also marked boundaries, transitions between regions, between the mortal and divine worlds. One particular river played a crucial role in Orion's story. After regaining his sight from Helios, Orion traveled to the island of Delos, where he met Artemis. The goddess of the hunt was practicing her archery along the banks of a sacred river when the giant hunter appeared. Their eyes met across the flowing water, and in that moment, a connection formed between the two greatest hunters in the world. They began hunting together, and the river became their meeting place. Each dawn, they would gather at its banks, planning the day's hunt. The river nymphs would watch them wade through the shallows, laughing and competing to see who could strike prey on the opposite bank. For Artemis, who had forsworn the company of men, Orion was a unique exception, a companion who understood her love of the chase. But rivers in Greek mythology are boundaries that should not be crossed carelessly. When Apollo grew jealous of his sister's friendship with Orion, he used a river to orchestrate the hunter's doom in one version of the tale. Seeing Orion wading far out in the sea, which is, after all, where all rivers flow, his head just a distant speck on the horizon, Apollo challenged Artemis to strike that far target with her bow. Not recognizing her companion, the goddess loosed her arrow with perfect aim. Only when Orion's body washed ashore did Artemis realize what she had done. Her grief was terrible, and she begged Zeus to place Orion among the stars. Some say the celestial river Eridanus flows from the tears she shed, an eternal reminder of how even the gods can be tricked into destroying what they love. High in the summer sky, we find a large but somewhat dim constellation known as Hercules, the Roman name for the greatest of Greek heroes, Heracles. The star pattern shows him kneeling, club in hand, his foot upon the head of Draco the dragon. But why does the mightiest man who ever lived kneel among the stars? The answer lies in understanding that true strength sometimes means knowing when to bow, and that the greatest victories may require us to humble ourselves. Heracles was born of Zeus's passion for Alcmene, a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty and virtue. Zeus, taking the form of her husband Amphitryon, lay with her on the same night as her true husband returned from war. From this union came twins, Iphicles, son of Amphitryon, and Heracles, son of Zeus. From the moment of his birth, Heracles was marked for both greatness and suffering. Hera's jealousy was immediate and implacable. She sent 2 serpents to kill the infant Heracles in his crib, but the baby strangled them with his bare hands, laughing as if they were toys. This was only the beginning of Hera's persecution, which would follow him throughout his mortal life. Yet paradoxically, his name means glory of Hera, for through his labors to appease her hatred, he would achieve immortal fame. As Heracles grew, his strength became legendary. He could uproot trees with his bare hands, divert rivers, and wrestle bulls to the ground. But strength without wisdom is dangerous, and young Heracles had a temper to match his might. In his youth, he killed his music teacher, Linus, with a lyre when corrected too harshly. Sent to tend cattle as punishment, he killed a lion that was terrorizing the herds and wore its skin as a cloak. The turning point came when Hera, in her cruelest stroke, drove Heracles mad. In his madness, he killed his own wife, Megara, and their children, seeing them as enemies in his deluded state. When sanity returned and he saw what he had done, his grief and guilt were unbearable. He fled to the oracle at Delphi, seeking purification and penance for his terrible deed. The oracle, guided by Hera, proclaimed that Heracles must serve his cousin King Eurystheus of Tiryns for 12 years, performing whatever labors the king demanded. Thus began the famous 12 labors of Heracles, tasks deemed impossible for any mortal. But Heracles would complete them all, transforming from a man of mere strength into a true hero. His position in the sky, kneeling with club raised, captures him not in triumph, but in humility. Some say he kneels in prayer, having learned that strength must be tempered with wisdom. Others say he kneels in service, showing that even the mightiest must sometimes bow to authority. Still others claim he kneels in exhaustion after his labors, demonstrating that even divine strength has limits. But perhaps most meaningfully, Heracles kneels, as he did at the end of his mortal life, dying from the poisoned shirt given unknowingly by his wife Deianira, in agony from the Hydra's venom burning through his skin. Heracles built his own funeral pyre on Mount Oeta. As the flames rose around him, he knelt in prayer, accepting his fate with the dignity that had eluded him in youth. Zeus, proud of his son's final act of courage, raised him to Olympus, where he was granted immortality and reconciled with Hera at last. The constellation. Hercules reminds us that true heroism is not just about strength or victory, but about service, humility, and the courage to face our own failures. The kneeling hero in the sky shows us that sometimes we must lower ourselves to rise higher, and that the greatest strength is knowing when to bend rather than break. Winding between Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the dragon Draco tells the tale of Heracles' 11th labor, one that took him to the very edge of the world. This was Ladon, the 100-headed dragon who guarded the golden apples of the Hesperides, and his story intertwines with themes of persistence, cleverness, and the importance of seeking help. The golden apples grew in a garden at the western edge of the world, where the Titan Atlas held up the sky. These apples were Zeus's wedding gift to Hera, and she had entrusted them to the Hesperides, the daughters of the evening, and to Ladon, a dragon who never slept. Each of his 100 heads spoke with a different voice, and his body coiled around the tree in an impenetrable barrier. When Heracles arrived at the garden after a journey filled with adventures, he faced a dilemma. Unlike his previous labors, this was not a monster to be killed, but a guardian performing its duty. The apples were needed to complete his labor, but Ladon was innocent of any crimes against humanity. Furthermore, the dragon was the offspring of the primordial monsters Typhon and Echidna, making him kin to many of the creatures Heracles had already faced. For once, Heracles chose wisdom over force. He sought out Atlas, who alone knew the secret of bypassing Ladon. The Titan, weary from eons of holding up the sky, proposed a bargain. He would fetch the apples himself if Heracles would hold the sky in his absence. Heracles agreed, and for the first time understood what true burden meant as the weight of the heavens pressed down upon his shoulders. When Atlas returned with the apples, he suggested that perhaps Heracles might continue holding the sky while Atlas delivered them to Eurystheus. But Heracles had learned cunning to match his strength. He agreed, asking only that Atlas hold the sky for a moment while he adjusted his lion skin cloak for comfort. Once Atlas resumed his burden, Heracles took the apples and departed, leaving the Titan trapped by his own deception. As for Ladon, different versions tell different fates. Some say Heracles had to kill him to escape. Others, that the dragon lived on until another hero, centuries later, ended his watch. But when Zeus placed Draco in the heavens, coiled around the pole star, it was to honor the faithful guardian who never abandoned his post. The dragon still guards his celestial garden, reminding us that duty and loyalty deserve recognition, even when they oppose our goals. Small but distinct, Sagitta the arrow flies eternally through the summer sky. This tiny constellation holds special significance for Heracles, as it may represent one of the most important arrows in mythology, the one that would ultimately bring about the great hero's mortal end. The arrow's story begins not with violence, but with compassion. During Heracles' journey to the garden of the Hesperides, he discovered Prometheus still chained to his rock in the Caucasus Mountains. For 30,000 years, the Titan had suffered daily torture as Zeus's eagle tore out his liver, which regenerated each night only to be devoured again the next day. This was Prometheus's punishment for giving fire to humanity. Heracles, who knew something about suffering for past mistakes, was moved by the Titan's plight. Without hesitation, he drew his bow and shot the eagle through the heart with a single arrow. The bird fell dead, ending Prometheus's daily torment. But this act of mercy required Zeus's permission to be permanent, and Heracles negotiated with his father to allow Chiron to take Prometheus's place in death, finally freeing the fire-bringer. That arrow, shot in mercy, carried forward a chain of consequences. Prometheus, in gratitude, advised Heracles on his labors and warned him of future dangers. But he also prophesied that Heracles would die from his own arrow's poison, a prediction the hero dismissed at the time. Years later, the prophecy proved true. Heracles had dipped his arrows in the Hydra's poisonous blood after defeating the monster, making them invariably lethal. When the centaur Nessus tried to assault Heracles' wife, Deianira, the hero shot him with one of these poisoned arrows. The dying centaur, in false repentance, told Deianira that his blood would create a love charm to ensure Heracles' faithfulness. When Deianira later feared losing Heracles to another woman, She soaked a shirt in Nessus's blood and sent it to her husband. But the centaur's blood carried the Hydra's poison from Heracles' own arrow. When the hero put on the shirt, the poison burned through his skin like acid. Thus, the arrow that had freed Prometheus became the instrument of Heracles' own liberation from mortality, as his suffering led Zeus to raise him to godhood. Sagitta, in the sky, reminds us that our actions, even our merciful ones, have consequences that ripple through time. The arrow flies on, neither good nor evil in itself, but carrying the power to change destinies. It teaches that the tools we create may return to us in unexpected ways, and that sometimes our end is written in our beginning. Near Hercules, in the northern sky, shines Corona Borealis, the northern crown, a perfect semicircle of stars. While this crown belongs primarily to Ariadne's story, it intersects with Heracles' tale in a way that shows how the threads of myth weave together, connecting heroes across generations. Ariadne was the daughter of King Minos of Crete, and she played a crucial role in Theseus's defeat of the Minotaur. She provided the ball of thread that allowed the hero to navigate the labyrinth and gave him the sword to kill her half-brother, the monster. In return, Theseus promised to marry her and take her away from Crete. But on the island of Naxos, he abandoned her while she slept, sailing away and leaving her alone on the shore. Ariadne's despair was absolute. She had betrayed her family, caused the death of the Minotaur, and fled her home, all for a love that proved false. But as she wept on the beach, Dionysus heard her cries. The god of wine and ecstasy had loved her from afar, and now approached in his chariot, drawn by panthers. He comforted her, wooed her, and made her his immortal bride. As a wedding gift, Dionysus gave Ariadne a crown crafted by Hephaestus himself, made of gold and Indian gems that shone with their own light. At their wedding feast, she wore this crown, and its beauty was so remarkable that the gods themselves applauded. Later, Dionysus threw the crown into the sky, where it became the constellation Corona Borealis. But how does this connect to Heracles? The connection comes through Theseus, who would later become Heracles' friend and companion. When Heracles descended to the underworld to capture Cerberus for his 12th labor, he found Theseus imprisoned there, stuck to the chair of forgetfulness as punishment for trying to kidnap Persephone. Heracles freed his friend, though Pirataus, Theseus's companion, remained trapped forever. When they emerged from the underworld, Theseus told Heracles the full story of his adventures, including his shameful abandonment of Ariadne. Heracles, who had killed his own family in madness and spent years atoning, understood the weight of such guilt. He reminded Theseus that while they could not undo their wrongs, they could choose to act with honor going forward. He pointed to Corona Borealis rising in the sky and noted that Ariadne had found happiness despite betrayal. The Northern Crown thus serves as a reminder that our worst actions may lead to unexpected good, that the gods can bring beauty from betrayal, and that redemption is possible even for heroes who have failed. For Heracles, who wore his own sins in the form of labors, Ariadne's crown in the heavens offered hope that suffering could be transformed into something eternal and beautiful. Argo's transformation. In ancient times, the southern sky held one of the largest constellations ever mapped. Argo Navis, the ship of the Argonauts. So vast was this celestial vessel that later astronomers divided it into 3 parts: Carina the keel, Puppis the stern, and Vela the sails. Yet even divided, these stars tell one of the greatest adventure stories ever conceived: the quest for the Golden Fleece. The ship Argo was no ordinary vessel. Built by Argus, the shipwright under the guidance of Athena herself, it was the finest ship ever to sail the ancient seas. Its timber came from the forests of Mount Pelion, except for one special piece. The prow was carved from a sacred oak of Dodona, Zeus's oracle tree. This gave the ship the power of prophecy, and it could speak, warning its crew of dangers ahead. Into this ship gathered the greatest assembly of heroes Greece had ever seen. Jason was their leader, charged by his uncle Peleus with the impossible task of retrieving the Golden Fleece from distant Colchis. But Jason was wise enough to know he couldn't succeed alone. Heracles joined the crew, taking time from his labors. The twins, Castor and Pollux, came aboard, bringing their complementary skills. Orpheus brought his lyre, knowing that music could calm both savage beasts and savage seas. Atalanta, the huntress who could outrun any man, fought for her place among the heroes. Peleus, who would father Achilles, took an oar. The sons of the north wind, Zetes and Calais, who had wings and could fly, joined the company. Each hero brought their own skills, their own stories, their own reasons for seeking glory on this impossible quest. The ship itself seemed to grow in magnificence with each hero who boarded. Athena had woven the sails herself, making them strong enough to withstand any storm. The oars were balanced so perfectly that they seemed to row themselves when the heroes found their rhythm. The hull was sealed with pitch blessed by the gods, making it watertight even in the roughest seas. When finally complete, with 50 heroes aboard, the Argo was launched with great ceremony. As it entered the water for the first time, the speaking prow declared in a voice like wind through leaves, "I shall carry you to the ends of the earth and back. Through dangers no ship has faced before. Some of you shall find glory, some shall find death, but all shall find their destinies upon my decks." Small but perfectly formed, Lyra graces the summer sky with Vega, one of the brightest stars in the heavens, marking the lyre's gleaming strings. This is the instrument of Orpheus, the greatest musician who ever lived, whose music could charm wild beasts, move trees to dance, and even persuade the gods of the underworld to break their iron laws. Orpheus was the son of Apollo, god of music, and the muse Calliope, patron of epic poetry. From birth, he was destined for musical greatness. Apollo himself gave the infant Orpheus a golden lyre and taught him to play. But Orpheus surpassed even his divine father, adding 2 strings to the traditional 7-stringed lyre to honor the 9 muses, and discovering melodies that had never before existed. When Orpheus played, the world stopped to listen. Rivers would pause in their courses to hear his songs. Mountains would lean in to catch every note. Wild beasts would lie down peacefully together. Wolves beside lambs, lions beside deer, all entranced by the harmony. The trees would uproot themselves and dance, and even stones would arrange themselves into patterns, moved by the rhythm and melody. His music was not mere entertainment, but had practical power. On the voyage of the Argonauts, when the heroes grew angry with each other during the long journey, Orpheus would play calming melodies that soothed their tempers. When they needed to row against strong currents, his rhythmic songs would coordinate their efforts, making 50 men row as one. When the sirens sang their deadly song, Orpheus played louder and sweeter, drowning out their fatal melody with life-affirming music. But the greatest test of his musical power came after his marriage to Eurydice. She was a wood nymph whose beauty matched the beauty of his music, and their wedding was celebrated by gods and mortals alike. But on their wedding day, as Eurydice ran through a meadow with her sisters, she stepped on a poisonous snake. Its bite killed her instantly, sending her soul to the underworld. Orpheus's grief was unbearable. He played laments so heartbreaking that the gods themselves wept. The trees shed their leaves in mourning, the rivers swelled with tears, and even the stones cracked with sorrow. Finally, Orpheus made a decision that no mortal had made before. He would journey to the underworld and play for Hades and Persephone, begging for his wife's return. The journey to the underworld was perilous, but Orpheus's music was his passport. He charmed Charon, the ferryman, into taking him across the Styx without payment. When Cerberus, the three-headed dog, threatened him, Orpheus played a lullaby that put all three heads to sleep. The shades of the dead followed him in a vast procession, remembering what it was like to feel emotion. In the throne room of Hades, Orpheus played and sang of his love for Eurydice. He sang of the shortness of mortal life, of the cruelty of separation, of love that transcended death itself. As he played, Tantalus forgot his thirst. Ixion's wheel stopped turning, and Sisyphus sat on his rock to listen. Even the Furies, those spirits of vengeance, wept for the first time since the creation of the world. Persephone was moved to tears, remembering her own separation from her mother. Hades himself, the grim lord of the dead, who had never before shown mercy, was touched by the music. He agreed to release Eurydice on one condition. Orpheus must walk ahead of her as they left the underworld, and not look back until both had reached the upper world. The journey back was agony. Orpheus could hear footsteps behind him, but couldn't be sure if it was Eurydice or a trick. As he saw daylight ahead and stepped out of the cave, he turned to share his joy with his wife. But she had not yet fully emerged from the shadows. As their eyes met, she faded like mist, reaching out to him as she was pulled back to the underworld forever. This time, no amount of music could persuade Hades to grant a second chance. Orpheus never recovered from this second loss. He wandered the world, playing mournful songs, rejecting the company of others. Finally, he was torn apart by Maenads, frenzied followers of Dionysus, who were angered by his rejection of their advances. But even in death, his head continued to sing as it floated down the river, and his lyre was placed in the heavens by Apollo and the Muses. Lyra reminds us that art has power beyond mere beauty. It can move the immovable, change the unchangeable, and bridge the gap between mortal and divine, between life and death. But it also warns that even the greatest gifts have limitations, and that looking back when we should move forward can cost us everything we've worked to achieve. And so, dear traveler, our journey through the starlit myths draws to a close. We have walked with heroes and gods, witnessed transformations and tragedies, celebrated triumphs and mourned losses, all written in the eternal patterns of the stars above. But as you prepare to drift into sleep, remember that these stories are not mere entertainment from a distant past. They are living narratives that continue to speak to us across the millennia, connecting us to every human who has ever looked up at the night sky and wondered. The myths we've explored tonight are humanity's way of making sense of our place in this vast universe. They take the random scattering of stars and give them meaning, purpose, and beauty. They transform the cold, distant lights into friends and guides, teachers and warnings. They make the infinite feel intimate and the eternal feel immediate. Remember that you are never alone beneath the night sky. The stars connect you to every human who has ever lived, to everyone who has ever looked up in wonder, fear, hope, or simple appreciation of beauty. You are part of an unbroken chain of stargazers stretching from the first humans who painted the Pleiades on cave walls to future generations who will walk among the stars themselves. The constellations will continue their eternal dance long after we are gone, carrying these stories forward to times and minds we cannot imagine. But for tonight, for this moment, they are yours. Their light shines for you. Their stories speak to you. Their eternal dance includes you. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you rest in a universe filled with stories, watched over by heroes, guided by bears, serenaded by celestial lyres. Tomorrow will bring its own adventures, its own challenges to face and transformations to undergo. But tonight, you can rest in the knowledge that you are part of the greatest story ever told, the story of consciousness arising from stardust to contemplate the very stars from which it came. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler in the cosmic dance. May the star stories light your way through sleep and back to waking. May you always remember to look up. May you always find wonder in the night sky. And may you always know that you are part of the story written in the stars. Good night, and may the constellations guard your rest.